let's talk a little bit about these three pieces of web governance. And I have this analogy of house building, if you don't notice, where you've got a framework and the framing, and then you have some putting the I don't know what you call it here, but for us it's sheetrock or drywall. And then there's the actual paint. So the framework is this part that's solid. You don't change it a lot, right? And a web governance framework actually specifies how you govern the web. It tells everyone in the organization how you set policies, how you set standards. It's in place by a senior mandate. So that formalization of authority, which was in that strategy piece, that's the mandate that says we will govern the web. And usually it'll say something like, and the people responsible for setting the policy or creating the web governance framework are XYZ. Maybe it's organizations or something like that. So it's expressed through this mandate. And the web governance framework actually specifies the criteria for inputs and decisions. And I want to dwell on this a little bit. I don't know if it's early in the morning. No, I don't have a slide on it. I have an inputs and decisions slide. If you care deeply about inputs and decisions, email me and I'll send it to you. But here's the deal. And I say this all the time, I will say it again. If you don't get this right, you can't really do anything. Because usually at the crux of I know I'm feeding back, at the crux of your inability to execute consistently and have a consistent, strong web presence is your inability to get people to adhere to standards and your inability to stop the infighting in the organization over who has control, right? So what the web governance framework does is express who gets to input for certain types of decision making, whether or not it's design related things or technology related things, who has to give input, and then ultimately who decides. So that's decided one time. So you don't have to decide it every time you say, oh, we're doing a content management implementation. Who gets to decide what we're going to do? Who gets to decide the look and feel? It's like every single project that you do, there's this element of like rationalization that happens. You should do that rationalization once. And then the selection of technology just becomes the selection of technology, not determining who gets to decide who gets to select technology. So this really turns the volume down and takes out a lot of the churn. So expressing who has inputs and decisions authority and straightening that out. It also expresses who gets to sit on standards creation bodies. Who gets to create the design standard, right? So maybe marketing is actually the decision maker about the design standard, but who should be around the table when you're asked for input? Well, the program offices, maybe that's not their specialty, but they have some legit requirements, legit needs, some legit business requirements. So you can say during the input process, they're doing that, and the decision making is up to someone else. So just to express it out, so there's three things that are going to be in this web governance charter, which is usually the document that we create when we're creating a framework for someone. You're going to specify who's the policy making body, where it sits, who's in it. Should be populated by organizational experts. And when we talk about policy in a second, there's this, and this is not unique to us, but I really like to separate policy and standards. I think in the web arena they get blended together. And what happens is you have too many of the different types of people sitting around the table trying to decide too many sorts of things. Policy making are things that you're going to do to protect the organization from risk, right? And we'll talk about that some. So these people will be web smart, but they're not web savvy, right? And they're helping to translate what the guiding principles and mission statements are into actual policy. So accessibility policy, records retention policy, social media policy. It's not really shouldn't be specifying how you use social media technology. It should specify the organization's attitude towards social media and what's allowed and what's not allowed. And so that's very different. The standard setting bodies are all about web expertise. They're organizationally smart. So they're not as smart as the people sitting on policy about how you run an admin and organization and risk, but they're aware of these things so that they're not setting standards that make things run amiss, and they're really enabling people to get work done on the web. And then there are the people throughout the entire organization. What do casual contributors do? What is the role of the program, lines of business, various offices as it relates to web governance? And so they're organizationally smart, but they're results oriented. They're the ones that, if you're in the kind of central web arena, are coming up to you all the time and saying, yeah, I know you want me to do this thing, but I have an X to do. Right? Our organization has a mandate to get this done, so I don't care what your web thing said. We need to get this done. They're right. They have a job to do. Sometimes it runs amiss of what you want to do as a more centralized strategic web team. So there's this rationalization that needs to happen. And so a web governance framework is actually going to express what that relationship is and how those conversations happen in the organization.